Welcome to Psychoanalytic Perspectives on Racism in America. This series explores the enduring presence of racism and the psychoanalytic mechanisms that sustain it, drawing inspiration from key works and current research. Hosts Dr. Karen Messina and Dr. Felicia Powell-Williams explore the complexities of racism through the lens of psychoanalysis as they foster a crucial dialogue on racial inequality. Here are your hosts.
Today, we're going to talk about something a little bit different. Generally, we talk about racism in America from a psychoanalytic perspective. But today, we're going to talk about what's happened in 2026 globally. There is a great deal of angst throughout the world, and we want to talk about that and explore it. So we're moving a little bit beyond our borders today. Why don't you kick us off? Going to start it, Felicia, and tell us your thoughts about this.
This is a really important topic for us to explore today. And I do predict that this will be woven into many other, podcasts that we will be exploring as well. I do want to say this as we look at what's happening globally. We do have to keep in mind many things. And one of the things that really comes up so loudly for us as we look at it from a psychoanalytic frame has to do with discrimination, has to do with othering, has to do with, and when we think about othering, the splitting and the projections, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But I do want to comment that in 2026, we aren't just, really seeing more of discrimination, but it's just that we've been seeing it more intensified in these very systemic ways. And so we have to look at that. We have to look at that and wonder with each other about this and wonder about why is it so difficult for us to be able to hold differences, that we could hold what belongs to us, who we are and how we may be within all of this, but can we also hold the other? And clearly, it's difficult to hold the other at times without these isms that we'll talk about today. But can we hold them both? And it will be really important for us to look at because sometimes holding two things, in our mind can be very difficult. And it be.
Excuse me, I just have to bring in my
Please.
defense that is so very important. I think about it so often, and that's splitting. And
Yes.
We're seeing it every place now. The good and the bad. I'm all good, my group is all good, you're bad, and your group is all bad. There isn't a way in which, and this is what you were talking about, I think, we can't hold both in mind. And I think it's because of the intensified global anxiety. That's part of it. So we see it locally in our communities, we see it in our states, we see it in our country, and we see it in many other countries.
That is it. That's it, Karen. And we see it, but when we see it, we hear it. So we're taking it in so many different ways. We're hearing that if it's not like this, then it's bad. If you don't think like me, don't look like me, then it's not right. It's bad. And that whatever is bad needs to be annihilated. That it's not something that we can sit with and think about together and hold our differences, within that frame as we, really work on in psychoanalysis or psychotherapy with many of our patients. So this is very much, as you've introduced today's time, it's all going on globally.
Absolutely. And that's what's so frightening to people. And I think xenophobia is really ramped up. If you're not like me, you're the other. Of course, othering. It's
Mhm.
I and my group, we're the good people. You and your people are the other, the not so good, the bad people. And if you think about different countries around the world, it seems to be happening every place.
Correct. You know, I I was taken by the article in Tap um,
Tell
a
us.
few years back. Um, Himanshu Agrawal, he had wrote this beautiful article called "In the Gray Zone," and I've you know let me look at my notes here because I want to really reference this and quote this accurately. But he wrote "In the Gray Zone, working through othering at APSA." And what was beautiful about this is, he began to talk about what you're sharing with our listeners is that for a while there was this physician versus non-physician, male versus female. There were all of these entities that were going on within psychoanalysis, let's say that.
That goes way back.
That was way back before I was in training. I mean, these things that we have to look at and that historically are noted in much of our literature. But what eventually happens is that we begin to think about this, these verses, even othering versus non-othering, and I'm gonna quote what he shared in the article. Now, recently, we have given this phenomena a name, which is othering, and have started talking about othering versus non othering. By doing so, it feels like we have moved up from discussing content to discussing process. And it feels like an evolution of sorts. Evolution can be messy. And I think that's another piece we will be getting into. As an organization, as a family of sorts, perhaps survival will require inspiring and expiring in the gray. And so the messiness of not only, what he's referencing to, but the messiness of discrimination, the messiness of the global, discrimination and what we're seeing. We're seeing wars, we're seeing divisions. And as we're talking about, looking at the projection and the splitting, it does get messy. And how does that messiness come up in our consulting rooms is something also that we can begin to dive into. But keeping it as clear and looking at othering, what are we bringing, to the table here?
You mentioned messy and messiness, and I have to bring in some thinking about AI. So I have to do it.
Well, then do it. Go
So
for it.
AI, and people don't often think about it this way. I don't think anyway, but AI is not messy. It's frictionless. People need friction, though, in order to deal with rupture and repair. Everything can't go smoothly all the time. AI is a yes man. It doesn't argue with you, just gives you information, tells you you're wonderful. But there's messiness in the human connection. And in part, I think that's what you're talking about, sorting through the messiness. Is that correct? More or less?
Correct. That's correct. And adding with AI, you're right. AI is very clean cut. It answers your question.
Right.
It's very clear, but there isn't any human connection as much as it will probably create more of that over time because it's ever evolving. But, after it gives you the information, it's gone.
Well, there's no pushback. And
There's
in
none.
pushback, you think. If somebody pushes back and questions you, you think, oh, maybe you don't immediately do that, but you think, oh, in time, hopefully, gee, I wonder if that person has a point. I wonder, I didn't like what they said initially, but I'm giving it some thought, and upon reflection, there could be something there. That maybe you go back to the person and say, about that conversation we had, I think maybe there was something to what you said. So there's a back and forth that you don't always like, but there's growth, and you really can't grow with AI. So there's my little
And
AI pitch.
we have to keep in mind too that in a psychoanalytic, or a psychotherapeutic frame, we're working on our own resistances and counter transferences, all of those things are there as we begin to identify, who we are or where, these uncomfortable isms or entities are within us. And so that is hard to do with AI. Is it impossible to do with AI? Not necessarily, but there is no one after, as you're saying, there isn't a person on the other side that is holding what is being brought to us,
Right.
or brought to our patients. There's no one when you use AI that's holding it, it's gone. Where with us, it is different. And as we talk about global discrimination in the use of social media, the use of AI, and the various types of entities that are out there. I think or digital spaces, let's say. I think that is really important because we gather information, we gather thoughts, from these places, and we wonder about where did these thoughts come from, and that they can be created through what's there. And then we as humans hold this in, where again, how much of this is, as I would tell many patients, real, versus fantasy. How do our fantasies grow? How
Right.
do they branch out? And then what gets created in that? And a lot of that, we do have to work through it because it creates something within us.
That's a very good point, and it brought to my mind that one thing I think we've lost in our country, and I think globally, is the inability or the difficulty in mentalizing, keeping the other person in mind. A couple of years ago, when I was writing one of my books, I I came across the idea. It might sound silly now because I guess everybody knows it, but a few years ago, I don't think that was the case. But anyway, algorithms prioritize outrage. They create a shared psychic environment of constant fight or flight because people stay engaged more when there are acrimonious discussions going on. So that's problematic because if you kind of you stay logged on because there's fighting going on or nasty discussions or name calling, and you log off sooner or change the channel, so to speak, when things are peaceful and when there are wonderful things discussed. That's a problem. So we're really dealing with objects of hate and staying with that versus other positive things. So I just thought, basically, I thought of the idea of the difficulty we have in mentalizing.
I think there is that difficulty there for sure. You bring up something. I have a lot of thoughts about mentalization. And just for those who will be listening into the podcast, I'm thinking about mentalization and it being the ability to just understand the mental state, of oneself and others. But I also go to this place of silence.
Mm.
And I'm holding that right now in mind because when we think about much of what you commented on, we often hear our patients come in and they tell us they want a safe space, I'm putting these quotations out there, but a safe space that, really belongs to them where they can share whatever it is they want to share. But what we find is that oftentimes many of the things they want to share, v- they have figured a way to defend against those parts that don't feel safe, those parts that are very uncomfortable. And we've talked many a times in previous podcasts about defense mechanisms and how they're utilized to ward off painful, uncomfortable, unsettling type of, um, you know, emotional responses or thoughts. But in reality, we have to be mindful of the silence in the room because when we start looking at this, we've talked about this, in many ways and looked at this when there's silence. Is there really some level of contentment or peace? But what we often find is when discussions are stopped, when there's silence in the room, there's something there that's not being spoken. There's thoughts and emotions that are there that we need to, continue to explore. But when it comes up, we need to be mindful of when did this start? When we're in our consulting rooms, when does the silence start? What is it centered around? And what has happened more so lately is that we see these silences, we see this discomfort centered around these elements of othering, this global discrimination, the painful uncertainties, the holding of something that triggers an earlier experience of not being, in a place that does feel safe. And can we allow our consulting rooms, to have that unsafety, let's call it, so that unsafety can be explored because there's much in there. So, when we begin to look at mentalization, and holding not only for ourselves but for someone else, we have to look at, even you mentioned the algorithm, but the rhythm that's happening, within the analytic frame, the psychotherapeutic frame, and when that rhythm is off, when the beat drops, when it stops, what's happening there and how do we begin to explore?
Right. I usually think of this, but what you said just reminded me of projective identification and how that's happening in the consulting room, of course, but also in people's lives all over the world. People are not tolerating things within themselves or things within their country. So these things are being projected onto other people or other countries. You're the bad country. Our country's good. And therefore, we're going to bomb you and destroy you. But we're going to keep watching to make sure that what we don't like about ourselves stays within you, or our perception of it being within you. But it's definitely not us, it's you. Or it's definitely not me, it's you. So projective identification, I think, rears its unfortunate head quite frequently here and around the world.
Definitely. I'm reminded of something that I'm going to read here as we're talking about this, that, actually, when we begin to look at tribalism and how it is rooted in splitting, I am this because I am not you.
Right.
And in days now, in our time now and recent, we see even how our political leaders, and not even political leaders, just people in general, tend to, you know, go to these places, as pathological tribalism of solidifying power and promising, these returns. And we have to be mindful of that, because as humans, we're looking for something that does feel comfortable at times, that we want a very positive outcome. And oftentimes that's something that our patients come to us. They want a positive outcome. But as we've been speaking during this podcast, we have to be mindful that there will be moments where things don't necessarily feel safe. There will be moments where there is going to be a loosening within the unconscious, where things are going to surface that will need to be explored, the othering, the isms. All of those things are going to be important, but providing a space
Well,
that will
that's
allow for that to happen is
that's
the
what
key.
creates growth, Felicia, right? I mean, we have to be stirred up in order to think about things, for those unconscious things to bubble up
That's
in the
it.
environment so that we can grow and prosper. And that takes me back to the frictionless AI world versus friction within the self and between two people, say, for example, or among a group of people. That's
Yes.
what happens.
Yes. Yeah.
Disagree, and then eventually we can mentalize and think of the other person, and think of the other group, and then grow and move forward.
Definitely. Definitely. And be able, to even talk about our own biases, because we all come into any relationship, with our own traditions, our own beliefs, our own loyalties. Those things are really, important as humans. Those are things that we gather early on in our own human development. And so that is always there. And can we be mindful that someone else has theirs too?
Mhm.
And if theirs look different than ours, can we talk about it? Can we
Yeah.
talk about how it makes us feel? Can we talk about the curiosities, the parts that do feel uncomfortable and unsettling?
Well, I
And
think that's exactly what's not happening here and around the world. We're not talking. We're assuming things about the other group and acting as if those things are true. And I mean, what
well
is
said. Yes,
what is
definitely.
I mean, that's a whole other scenario, another podcast for sure, or another series. So that's I think that probably is about enough for today. If you have any final thoughts, please share them.
I want to end on something that I remember hearing from Anton Hart. I wrote this down because this was so powerful. He wrote this in 2017, and I would like our listeners to also hold this, because this really does bring a lot of importance to the work that we do, and our time with our patients. And Anton Anton wrote, in our attempts to encourage and to welcome people who are different from ourselves, who are other in one way or another, into our consulting rooms, we must, as psychoanalysts and psychotherapists, ask more of ourselves than competence. We must mobilize the best of what psychoanalysis has to offer, a stance of openness to the unknown, the unfamiliar, even the frightening in our patients and in ourselves. This is what we've been talking about
Yes,
this morning. And I think the beautiful poetic words here that Anton presents in this in his writing, really sums it up.
it really
And
does.
yeah, yeah. I applaud, all of the work that has gone into us looking at differences and those who have contributed within any psychoanalytic therapeutic frame. I applaud them, but we have a lot more work to do.
In our consulting rooms and in the world in general. I feel like we're
Yes.
missionaries, Felicia. We need to get the word out.
Get the word out. Get the word out, definitely.
Okay, well, we hope that you will join us again. And if this podcast was helpful in any way, please subscribe to our channel and pass the word along.